Yeah, let's talk about Carolina Reapers. So these days everybody wants to grow the hottest pepper in the world, and it's no longer the Carolina Reaper, it's Pepper X. Guess what? Pepper X ain't for sale yet, and it will not be for a couple of years. So growing Carolina Reapers, well, that's the next best thing, and perhaps the best choice. So these days everybody wants to grow the hottest stuff in the world, but most of the people I know, they quit after 1 year because the stuff is way too hot. So growing an even hotter pepper, it's not going to make a bigger difference, and you're probably not going to even taste the difference because it's so hot, your senses get overwhelmed. You're probably going to throw up, get capsicum burn or so, stomach cramps, or yeah, it's not really funny or the best experience, especially for the people that are starting to grow the first year of peppers. But a Carolina Reaper can make a lot of difference, especially once you start using it in your food, cooking with Reapers, cooking with peppers. But a little bit goes a long way, and there's no need for overdoing it. Otherwise, you're not even going to taste your food. It's just going to be overwhelmed with peppery taste and capsaicin. However, the plants from Heat on Leash are, I don't know, a couple of months old, and they're getting pretty big, and the summer starts here in Holland right now after a couple of months of rain, and it was raining a lot. But a lot of people have been asking about my fertilizer, how it's been implemented with the Carolina Reapers, but also what you do when you cannot add any fertilizers in the potting soil because it's too wet and you're gonna kill off the roots, or it maybe even damage the plant permanently. So that's one topic we're gonna address today. The second part is, do I prune, top, or remove leaves from pepper plants? I do top certain types of pepper plants, especially those that get very tall and produce a lot of peppers. And the reason is, when a plant starts producing a Y, the typical Y, it's gonna break in half when there's too much weight in the middle. So it's gonna snap in half eventually, especially when you use something like fruit fuel, which produce a lot of peppers, and therefore there's a lot of mass weight in the plant. Second is natural topping. When you don't do it yourself and the plants get too tall and there's too much mass in the plant, when there is a wind gush, it's gonna snap the plant in half, and yeah, all your product is on the floor, and yeah, season is over. So when you do it yourself, you have control of when it happens and how long it takes to recover. That's also another thing. Recovery takes about a month and a half. So when you want to top plants, especially again big plants or plants that need to be very wide to produce a lot of fruits, yeah, you need to take account that it's going to take a month and a half before it's well, full in production and start growing again. The next and most obvious thing is, I'm using very large containers. These are about 40 liters. So normally I will use something called a blue mud system, but there's no need for it. It rained too much and the pots are always soaked. But when the potting soil or in the container is dry, I'm still giving it fruit fuel. But sometimes it's not really efficient because, again, you're going to drown the plants when you give too much water and when the soil is wet. So I'm using something called foliar spray, and this is a mixture of water, magnesium and kalium ox, which you can spray on the leaves, which is going to be beneficial for the plants. Therefore my plants are very green and very healthy with the least amount of problems. And even though my soil is soaked and there's a lot of complications in the root area, the plants get still their nutrition, but this time from the leaves. But I still have some small problems with aphids and snails and caterpillars, but that's an easy fix with a little bit of dish soap or soap and a little bit of alcohol. You can do a lot of things. I know a lot of people that are freaking out because in one of my videos on my other channel, Dutch Pepelo, I was explaining that Calmar, the product that a lot of factories sell as Calmar, it actually contains a lot of nitrogen, and it's actually pretty damaging for a plant when you're introduced too much nitrogen, especially when you use a product which has a lot of nitrogen. We decided to create a product which doesn't contain any nitrogen, and you can use your own magnesium source or magnesium sulfate and work it together. And it's pretty simple, but it's really efficient, and therefore there's no risk for the plants. They're already stressed as is, and yeah, introducing too much nitrogen, especially when the soil is drying and all the fertilizer is going to be available again, yeah, it's a big problem. So one of the things that I've figured out with pepper plants has actually nothing to do with pepper plants. It actually has to do with the blueberry plants that I've been growing. And I figured something out. Blueberries don't like cold. They don't like too wet of an environment. And when they're stressed, they give off leaves that are orange red. So they have a very specific indicator in the leaves. Pepper plants don't have this. So looking at a pepper plant, they're most likely green, especially when you use something like fruit fuel. So growing a pepper plant, well, it's pretty difficult when you don't know what kind of weather they're like. But when you have something like a blueberry plant that has a very specific indicator in the leaves when it's too cold or too wet, you can use this as a reference point. By the way, the new leaves are all green, so I think the summer is coming. So it's a very surprising companion plant to grow side by side with peppers. And I know it's a little bit weird of using companion plants like blueberries, but when you don't have the knowledge about how plants are growing, or when plants are green but it's way too cold to produce a lot of fruits, you can use the visual cues of a blueberry, if the weather is okay, for pepper plants to produce a lot of peppers. And the same goes for tomatoes. So the next thing is actually a pretty funny one. I live in an apartment complex, which means I live a little bit higher. The insects around here, they're not really beneficial. Also, I don't get a lot of birds that are removing caterpillars or snails or all that stuff. So I have to treat my plants with, I'm not going to say a pesticide because I'm not using that stuff, but I'm using green soap with a little bit of spiritus. And it's a mixture of, I don't know, 1–2% or something like that in a liter of water. And it's actually really effective. But a lot of people don't want to use it because they want to use something that's more like nature provides and all that stuff. But when you live in an apartment complex, or when you live in an urban area and you don't have natural enemies for aphids or caterpillars or snails, you have to do something about it. You have to do something, otherwise bye harvest. I also know a couple of folks that want to use fruit fuel as a foliar spray, but you shouldn't do it because this stuff is very powerful and it will burn your plants. It's not designed as a foliar spray. It's designed as a hydroponics fertilizer and a fertilizer for soil, but not for foliar spray. This is one of the advantages of using fruit fuel. And you grow a small plant and in hydroponics or in media or in soil, and you let it fruit in a very early age. However, with these types of plants it's very difficult. 3 of them are exactly the same in growth, but one of them is completely different. And that one is a true OG Carolina Reaper, and the other ones are probably Carolina Reaper Whites. So the Carolina Reaper Reds are the dominant species. The browns and the reds are dominant, and the whites, yellows and all the different colors, they're not the dominant colors, which means that a Carolina Reaper Pure White or white can revert back to a Carolina Reaper Red. And that's also one of the reasons why people generally stabilize the species before they send it out to public. But sometimes a lot of folks that sell peppers just want to make a buck, so they create a species and within a couple of months they sell stuff. But it's very annoying, especially when you have different kinds of colors. Because this one is very green, dark green, which means it's probably a Carolina Reaper Red. And this one is very pale and it's probably a yellow or white species. So growing Carolina Reapers, or species that are pretty new, especially the crossbred, can present a lot of problems, and that's why I always test before I go full size with these types of plants. Sometimes I get customers that just want to have the Carolina Reaper whites, and when I sell Carolina Reaper reds, because I didn't test it, it's very annoying and people want their money back. Also, growing a separate plant which is completely isolated from the rest makes it that these peppers that are on this plant are completely isolated from the rest, and therefore these seeds that these peppers are producing are true to the species that have been growing. The next question is obviously how much water and fertilizer do you need to give to Carolina Reapers or pepper plants. And it actually depends on the weather. Is it hot? It's between 150 to 200 milliliters an average on a day, but sometimes it can go upwards to a liter a day. It depends on the size of the pot, on how much water evaporates and all that stuff. Because fruit fuel is a production fertilizer, which means that it's designed for stimulating production in peppers, tomatoes and fruit-bearing plants, you have to give it constantly, which means that when you give water, you give a little bit of fertilizer. And on the back of the package, the feed chart, it's the most important. My plants outside are medium to large plants, and they're starting to transition to flowering and fruiting. So I can choose between those two, but you always give water with fertilizer. So if you give 20 liters of water, you mix up a batch of 20 liters of water with fertilizer. However, to save a buck and also prevent problems, you sometimes have to flush with a couple of liters of water, which means that you can soak the soil and all the available nutrients that is in excess will flush out. And flushing is just a technique by removing the excess salts or minerals from the soil or hydroponic media, and therefore preventing fertilizer burn in the leaves or in the roots, which sometimes can cause a lot of problems. So one of the questions I get a lot about fruit fuel, it's not about fruit fuel, is if I ship it throughout Europe. And the answer is yes. Fruit fuel is completely legal and completely registered in all of Europe, which means that I can transport it all over the place within the rules and the regulations of the country. Some countries don't allow amount of fertilizer, but for the most part, when I ship it with a postal service, there's no problem. But it didn't activate all the countries in Europe because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So for the most part, for the people that live in Europe and they don't see, or when they put in the transport data of the shipment data, and they don't see their country in it, well, send in a mail and I will send back a quote with all the data that's necessary for shipment. Outside of Europe, that's a different question, and I don't really have an answer to it. I ship to certain people in the United States, but those arrange their own transport because they buy in a lot of product from Europe and they ship it overseas. But direct to customers, I never done that before, so I don't know for sure. But all the rules and regulations in the United States makes me a little bit nervous, but maybe in the future, I don't know. But for now, the heat on these plants are huge. They're producing and they're growing like crazy, even with all the rain of the last couple of months, and they're still growing on fruit fuel fertilizers. So I'm very happy.